We must not shy away from a truth that has been obscured by time, culture, and the moral narratives we tell ourselves. The villain is not born out of mere malice, but from something much deeper. The villain does not appear from the void, nor is he a creature of pure evil. He is a reflection, an echo, of a world that has turned its gaze away from the complexities of human nature, from the dark undercurrents that flow beneath the surface of every soul. If we are to understand the villain, we must first understand ourselves. For the villain, as much as he stands opposed to the hero, is made of the same substance. His soul is shaped by the same forces that shape our own. His motivations, his desires, his actions, these are born not of some external, demonic influence, but from the crucible of life itself. It is not his actions that make him monstrous. It is the rejection of his own humanity, a deep and silent refusal to confront the shadows that lie within him. In every human being there exists a struggle, a war between the conscious self, the ego, and the unconscious forces that surge below the surface. These forces, these shadows, are the parts of our psyche that we cast aside. The unacknowledged desires, the suppressed anger, the fear that lies dormant. Jung, in his exploration of the human psyche, called this the shadow, the unknown, the repressed, the denied. But here's the thing. There is no truly good person who has not, at some point, looked into the abyss and recoiled. To become a hero is not to deny the shadow. It is to face it, to accept it, and to integrate it. The villain, in contrast, is the one who cannot do this. He is the one who refuses to reckon with the darker parts of himself, and it is from this refusal that his descent into villainy begins. In many ways, the villain is a reflection of the parts of us that we would rather not acknowledge. Carl Jung teaches us that the process of individuation, the path to wholeness, requires embracing the shadow, making peace with the darkness within. The villain, however, has chosen to reject this path. He has chosen instead to give power to his unacknowledged desires, his rage, his suffering. In doing so, he becomes consumed by them. He becomes the shadow, and in that shadow, his true nature is revealed, not as a monster, but as a man who has given in to the worst aspects of himself. The villain, then, is not a being of pure evil, but a tragic figure, a person who has lost their way. He is not immune to the pain, the frustration, the fear that we all experience. It is just that he has surrendered to these forces instead of confronting them. Nietzsche, in his work on the will to power, described the human drive as a force to overcome obstacles, to transcend oneself. But the villain does not transcend. He is not concerned with self-overcoming. Rather, he is concerned with imposing his will on others. He believes that in dominating the world around him, he will find a sense of mastery over his own fractured existence. But this, too, is an illusion. The villain's path is one of domination, not liberation. In their quest to exert power, they are blind to the fact that true power lies in mastering oneself, not in controlling others. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the individual who overcomes the constraints of society, morality, and convention to create his own values. The villain, in his blind lust for power, is the antithesis of the Übermensch. He does not create, he destroys. He does not seek freedom, he seeks subjugation. But in doing so, he only tightens the chains that bind him to his own suffering. And here lies the greatest tragedy of the villain's psyche. His rejection of his humanity, his refusal to confront his shadow, leads him to a life of eternal conflict. He is a man at war with himself. Each act of villainy, each step down the path of darkness, is an attempt to silence the dissonance within. But this only deepens the dissonance. The more he tries to destroy the aspects of himself that he finds repulsive, the more they control him. He becomes consumed by the very forces he wishes to suppress. But this internal war is not unique to villains alone. It is the war of every human being. Jung's concept of the shadow is not a moral judgment. Each of us has our own darkness. We all have parts of ourselves we wish to hide, desires we wish to suppress. The difference between the villain and the hero is not the presence of the shadow, but how they respond to it. The villain chooses to allow his shadow to rule him, while the hero, by confronting his shadow, achieves integration. The villain, in his refusal to confront his darkness, lives in a state of perpetual suffering. It is this suffering that drives him to actions of cruelty, for it is only through these actions that he can momentarily silence the pain. Yet, like a wound that is never allowed to heal, the pain only intensifies. And so, the cycle continues. The villain is trapped in his own psyche, unable to escape the darkness he has refused to confront. But here, too, lies a deeper truth. The villain is not born, he is made. He is a product of the world that rejects its own shadows. We, as a society, have constructed narratives of good and evil that ignore the complexities of human nature. We have created a moral dichotomy that simplifies the human experience into absolutes: good versus bad, light versus dark. But in doing so, we have forgotten that every human being contains within them the potential for both. The villain is the person who has not yet come to terms with this truth. He is the one who believes that he must be wholly good or wholly bad, that there is no middle ground. The hero, by contrast, is the one who has accepted that the line between good and evil is not as clear as it seems. He has acknowledged his own darkness and made peace with it. He has become whole. The villain's psyche is a tragic portrait of human potential gone awry. He is a person who has failed to reconcile his inner conflicts, who has rejected the darkness within him and projected it outward onto others. But in doing so, he becomes consumed by that very darkness. He loses his humanity, not through the actions he commits, but through his refusal to face the complexities of his own nature. So let us not look at the villain as a creature of pure evil. Let us instead look at him as a reflection of what happens when we fail to integrate the parts of ourselves that we fear. The villain is not the enemy outside of us, but the shadow within us, the part of ourselves we deny, repress, and refuse to acknowledge. In understanding him, we may find a way to better understand ourselves. As we continue this exploration into the psyche of the villain, we must recognize that the villain is not merely a caricature of evil, but a product of a fractured soul. A soul that has, for reasons both personal and societal, rejected the complexity of human existence. His villainy is not rooted in the desire for destruction alone, but in his inability to reconcile the contradictory elements within himself. In truth, the villain embodies the very chaos that lies at the heart of every human being. The villain, then, is not a man who is inherently evil, but one who has chosen to surrender to the darker aspects of his nature. His path is one of resistance to vulnerability, resistance to empathy, and resistance to the very notion of moral ambiguity. He clings to a worldview where everything must be either good or bad, black or white. There is no room in his psyche for the grays, the nuances, the contradictions that lie at the heart of every human being. Nietzsche, in his philosophy, warned against the dangers of dualistic thinking, the tendency to view the world in terms of opposites. For him, this binary approach is not only limiting, but also dangerous. He proposed the idea of the Übermensch, a figure who transcends these dualities and lives beyond the confines of conventional morality. The villain, however, is caught in this very dichotomy. He sees the world as a struggle between good and evil, and he perceives himself as the embodiment of the latter. In this view, he is not a person trying to overcome himself, but one who believes that the only way to gain power is by breaking the world into pieces, by imposing his will over others. But this need to control, to dominate, is a sign of weakness, not strength. It is the manifestation of a fractured ego, one that cannot stand the thought of imperfection. The villain is terrified of his own vulnerabilities, of the parts of himself that he sees as weak. He is terrified of the possibility that he may not be in control. This fear of losing control drives his actions, which is why, paradoxically, he often seeks to control others. He attempts to impose order on the world in a desperate bid to silence the chaos within him. But this, too, is futile. True power lies not in the domination of others, but in the mastery of the self. The villain's refusal to face his inner chaos makes him the very embodiment of it, as he tries to force the world into his narrow view. The need to control others is one of the villain's most defining traits, and it comes from a deep and unresolved conflict within himself. He sees the external world as a mirror of his own inner turmoil, a world of disorder, uncertainty, and chaos. By imposing his will upon the world, he believes he can achieve a sense of control, of peace. But true peace comes not from the subjugation of others, but from the acceptance of the self. In this way, the villain is not simply a figure of evil. He is a person who is deeply disconnected from himself. He does not acknowledge his own flaws, his own weaknesses, or his own contradictions. Instead, he projects these onto the world around him. His villainy is the result of his inability to reconcile the parts of himself that he finds unacceptable. In his mind, the only way to deal with his flaws is to eliminate them completely, to destroy everything that does not fit into his idealized vision of self and world. It is this rejection of the self, this refusal to accept one's own humanity, that makes the villain's path so tragic. The villain's refusal to accept his own shadow is not simply a moral failing, it is a psychological one. It is an attempt to escape the complexities of the human condition, to refuse the process of individuation that Carl Jung described as essential to the development of a whole and healthy self. But by rejecting the shadow, the villain only strengthens it. He does not overcome the darkness within him. He feeds it, nurtures it, and allows it to take over his soul. Jung believed that the integration of the shadow is the key to achieving psychological wholeness. To reject this process is to remain fragmented, to live in a state of constant inner conflict. The villain, caught in this conflict, cannot find peace. His actions are not the result of some external force of evil, but of an inner fracture that he cannot heal. He lives in a state of perpetual war with himself, a war that he believes he must fight against the world around him. But the true battle is not with the world, it is with his own psyche. The villain's descent into darkness, then, is not an inevitable fate, but a choice. It is the choice to turn away from the complexities of human nature, to reject the painful process of self-discovery and self-acceptance. It is the refusal to engage with the very parts of himself that make him human. The villain does not become evil because of the world he inhabits, but because he refuses to confront the world within him. This refusal to confront the inner world is often tied to a deep sense of shame, a shame that the villain carries with him throughout his life. It is a shame that he cannot reconcile with the parts of himself that he deems unworthy. This shame is not simply a moral judgment. It is a psychological wound that festers within the soul. It is a wound that cannot heal because the villain refuses to acknowledge it. Instead, he projects it onto others, blaming the world for his suffering and seeing himself as a victim of circumstance. In his mind, the world owes him something. He believes that if he can impose his will upon others, he will finally gain the recognition and power that he feels he deserves. But this, too, is an illusion. The villain's quest for power is a quest to silence his own inner torment, to escape the painful realization that he is not in control. Yet, by seeking control over others, he only deepens his own disempowerment. It is here that we begin to see the true cost of the villain's inner war. His actions, as destructive as they may seem, are not simply expressions of malice. They are expressions of a profound internal conflict, a conflict that he cannot resolve because he refuses to acknowledge the deeper truths about himself. The villain's path is one of self-deception, a path that leads not to liberation, but to enslavement. At the core of this self-deception is the belief that the villain is separate from the rest of humanity. He sees himself as different, better perhaps, but certainly not equal. He believes that his darkness makes him special, that his ability to embrace evil makes him powerful. But this is the ultimate lie. The villain's darkness is not what sets him apart from the rest of humanity. It is what connects him to it. His villainy is a reflection of the shadow that exists within all of us, the shadow that we must all confront if we are to truly become whole. In the end, the villain is not the monster he appears to be, but a person trapped in his own psyche, unable or unwilling to confront the darkness within. He is a person who has lost his way, who has chosen to embrace the shadows rather than integrate them. And while his actions may seem monstrous, they are, in truth, the tragic result of his inability to see himself as he truly is. If we are to understand the villain, we must understand this essential truth. The villain's inner world is not so different from our own. We all have within us the potential for both good and evil. The difference between the hero and the villain is not the presence of darkness, but how we choose to face it. The villain is the one who refuses to face the darkness within, who allows it to consume him, while the hero is the one who embraces it and transcends it. In recognizing this, we come to understand that the villain is not our enemy, but a reflection of our own unacknowledged fears, desires, and weaknesses. And in this understanding, we may find the key to our own liberation, not through the destruction of the villain, but through the acceptance of our own shadow.